So I'm really excited to share with everyone some of the collective learning from the past couple months with our grantees and also just reflecting on this community of practice journey. So what have we learned about equitable AI over the last months and year? And today I'm going to talk through a couple of different findings, particularly as it relates to the 5 different grantees of the Equitable AI Challenge, spanning different industries and geographies globally. So with each of those grantees, we explored 5 questions. What does equitable AI mean? How do their projects advance equitable AI? What challenges were faced and lessons learned? Good practices that can be applied more broadly beyond just their projects? And what's the role of different stakeholders as we move forward? So excited to share with you all some of the different findings and you hear back about some of the different responses from the various grantees. So really just kicking off with, what does equitable AI mean? So we had conversations with each of the grantees around reflecting on this topic after implementing their projects. And really, it kind of lands in these 2 different types of buckets. So equitable AI technology is seen as AI that can be one of 2 things. Maybe it's AI that does not make inequality, exclusion, disadvantage, or unfairness worse, particularly or especially for marginalized people and vulnerable groups, or it's often defined as AI that has a purpose to and actively mitigates exclusion or disadvantage while promoting greater inclusion and gender equity in the world. So again, these aren't necessarily the only definitions. These are just the 2 that kind of emerge from the different grantees and this work. And again, kind of different ways that people talk about AI technology that's equitable. And now there's also a couple of different approaches that were mentioned when discussing what equitable AI means. So sometimes in conversations about, what is equitable AI, a lot of conversation goes to, well, it's AI that includes several different types of approaches. And those tend to be thinking about who's developing technologies. So equitable AI requires diversity in terms of developers and decision makers who are working on building these different technologies. So a reflection of who's in the room and who has decision-making power and authority when it comes to designing and building technologies. Advancing equitable AI is also seen as approaches that incorporate reflection on data. Is the data representative of different demographics? And, kind of this acknowledgement that data can reflect and different sorts of inequities. So are there considerations around what kinds of inequities might be built in or reflected in that data? And then there's also considerations around the model as well. So what is the purpose, proxies, and variables that the AI model and algorithms are learning from? And then lastly, when it comes to building an equitable AI, there's also a reflection that requires an ongoing commitment and reflection. So perhaps adaptation of the ML model and recognizing how data might be informing and updating that model over time, and really kind of being committed to reflecting on whether or not it can advance equity and thinking about that, through the duration of the model and the ways that it's used. And that kind of brings us to the last piece around kind of equitable AI, which is reflection on, is it equitably accessed and used? So some grantees really talked about equitable AI as AI that different folks can access and use. And that's important considerations if it's an AI technology that is, for example, an app that's on a smartphone that might not be equitably accessed and used based on gender digital divides, for example. So those are some different ways that kind of the concept of equitable AI is discussed. And then in terms of how the different projects and grantees advance equitable AI, there's really kind of 3 main buckets that grantees discussed. So the first is kind of projects that really explored and researched ways that AI can support gender equity efforts. So kind of that second bucket of definition. There were a couple projects that were really focused on using AI to tackle gender inequities that exist in the world. And then there are projects that were focused on identifying limitations of AI tools to avoid gender biases and mitigate them and addressing those limitations. So that kind of goes to that first bucket of definition. And then there were different projects that were focused really on kind of approaches, building capacity of different stakeholders throughout the processes to understand how to mitigate challenges, increase awareness of gender biases that can be in tools, and how to kind of move forward. So those are really more focused on kind of different approaches and stakeholders. And then in terms of some of the different kind of challenges that we're faced, there's a couple of high-level tensions that really exist in this space. The first one is perfect kind of the enemy of the good? So there's this point that was often brought up and discussed around, the past and current is very exclusionary. There's a lot of gender inequities that continue to exist in the world. So if AI tools aren't perfect, do we continue to use them or not if they're still better than the status quo? There's this real tension that exists here. AI tools may be less discriminatory than the status quo, but because they are the black box nature of these tools, they still have the potential to solidify different inequities and can introduce new dangers. And so there's this very real tension that exists. And then private sector incentives. The private sector might be more incentivized to advance inclusion, or to the previous slide, the private sector may be more incentivized to advance inclusion, but is it really incentivized to address equity and injustice? And gender makeup of technical teams, the AI field is dominated by men. And there's a lack of kind of gender diversity when it comes to folks that are in STEM fields that are developing, managing these technologies. And just a lack of shared alignment on key definitions. A lot of times, equitable AI is equated to AI that's fair, but those aren't necessarily the same thing. And there can be people talking past each other around some of these different verbiage and definitions. So those are some high-level tensions. And then more specifically, there were challenges in terms of data. So folks on this call in this community are very familiar with this, but data can reflect gender norms and inequities. There's lack of available of clean data and gender gaps that exist. And there can be misidentification or data that may not include self-identification. One of the grantees noted that they were incorporating, they would ask folks to self-identify their gender, and then they would check that against Facebook, but sometimes there were actually different genders from what was self-identified through this particular app versus when they would check that on Facebook. So there can be kind of misidentification, maybe lack of self-identification that can make it really hard to understand or to assign gender to different data. And then with algorithms themselves, they can be time and resource intensive. One grantee noted that they would continue to make tweaks, but it would take a really long time to make those tweaks because it could take a while to train that model just based on the computing power. And then use of AI tools. So, there's a couple of different challenges here, but ultimately people are making the final decision. And there's also limited communication and transparency to different stakeholders. So in order to explain this kind of challenge and lesson a little bit more, I actually want to bring up two of the grantees, Christina Martinez Pinto, who's the founder of PIP Policy Lab, and Kate Grimova, the co-founder of Women in Digital Transformation, to share a little bit about their project and the challenge that they saw in this regard. I think is a really interesting one, and some of the kind of the lessons you learned. So just if you could quickly share a little bit about kind of bring that challenge to light a little bit more, that would be great.
Thank you so much. So we worked specifically with the AI tools and the teams in Guanajuato State, Mexico, with the Ministry of Education, working on the early prevention on their school drop-offs. And it was very interesting. We have numerous outcomes and lessons learned, but specifically we had a lot of discussions about their problems of their engagement, their stakeholders and external stakeholders. In our case, it was teachers and parents, and more specifically, the teachers need to be engaged and learn more on how the AI tools, their AI system works, and not necessarily they have all this knowledge and information and understanding and transparency. So it was very important questions for us, how to ensure the stakeholders' engagement and buy-in. In our case, we specifically work with the policymakers and government development, AI development team to prepare the right environment. And specifically in the AI checklist and ethical AI guide developed under this project, we talk on how to ensure internal and external stakeholders engagement through the consultation, starting from the project initiation stage. It was important to communicate the AI project objectives, the application of the results, and also provide the recommendation for the development team on how to build these consultations, how to make the consultations systemically. We found out that it's very important to work with the AI development tools at early stage to ensure this transparency and engagement, and also to have all exactly, Genevieve, what you discussed on their slides about their the common definition, the understanding on the importance of their gender bias. We also even thought a little bit beyond the project that it would be nice to have moving forward some kind of gender sensitive training, gender sensitive and equality training in ongoing professional education for teachers that will raise the awareness of gender bias both in data and their classroom environment. Thank you.
And if I may add quickly, something that was very unique to our project is that at the beginning, the team that we were collaborating with was an all-male team, but that changed over time because we provided recommendations on the importance of diversity. So by the end of the project, half of the team and the leader of the team was as a woman. And you could see the difference because this woman was a champion of the initiative. Another thing that I think was unique to the success of our development of this use case, of this collaboration with the government of Guanajuato, was that not only was housed within an innovation team in the Ministry of Education, but also that the government had 20 years of wealth of data, and that they were working in parallel with other international organizations to harmonize the data, to clean it up, and to develop an algorithm that will be tested for the predictive analysis to come up with insights to prevent school dropout. So this is really interesting because with our approach, what we were promoting or what we were, our main goal was the mainstreaming of the gender perspective throughout the design and deployment of their project. And they were very open to these kind of collaborations. But something else that we realized when working with the team, beyond the exciting results that we got before and after the treatment in terms of identifying and mitigating gender bias, and therefore changing the game for what it means to have evidence-based, unbiased, or the least unbiased evidence-based policymaking, is that often what we see is that the projects focus on the technology themselves, on the innovation that using AI itself presents, but not necessarily, as Kate was mentioning, on the involvement of all the stakeholders that have a say and are impacted by this technology. So we see an opportunity, and we highlighted in the policy recommendations report that is also published and available for read for the community. And something that we highlighted was that interested stakeholders, parents, students, community leaders, educational authorities, and other key actors must be included from the design and implementation phases with a responsible technology cycle. Their role should go beyond an initial discussion of possible risks as to be considered in a pilot stage and to be able to provide feedback throughout the life cycle of the project. In addition, the right to audit the results of the model must be considered within the framework of the attributions of each party involved, as well as a mechanism for the explainability of the results. And more specifically, and of course we provide much more detail in this report, but what we were suggesting in terms of going beyond the work that we did with the policymakers themselves was, one, to create consultation mechanisms open to civil society and other specific interest groups. Two, the possibility to design an explainability flow. Three, to develop a comprehensive communication strategy. Together with this, to train the communication strategy, not only to have a better understanding of what AI means, but also to better communicate the scope of the projects in terms of the audiences that will be impacted by it. And as in this space, to also have to also share our lessons in international spaces for continuous iteration of the initiatives and improvement of them. And just to highlight another piece that was central to our use case was not only the use of open source tools for the identification of gender bias and its mitigation, but also the training of the local team to develop local capacity. Because in the end, what we were saying is we want them to own these tools so they can use them in any other innovation case that they will be development within the ministry, but not only within the ministry, but that can have an exponential effect to other ministries in local governments, and therefore to other local governments in Mexico and in the Latin American region.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate kind of bringing that to life and hearing more. So I'm going to quickly just walk through some of the good practices. We'll have a learning report as well that or we're working on a learning report as well that has kind of captures more of these nuance. So I'll just go over these pretty quickly. So some of the good practices are around teams, community engagement, and leadership mindset. So yeah, moving on here. Just recognizing that equity is not the status quo, and equitable tools require commitment and planning. Also making sure to have multidisciplinary teams. Christine and Kate brought that really great point up in their own team, and making sure that there's kind of gender experts that are involved, ensuring team members include people from the particular context, so diversity from a different range of backgrounds, and engaging people who will use and who are the targets, the tools from the get-go. So really thinking about community engagement in a meaningful way. And not only focusing on the design of the tech, but thinking about how it will be sustainably used and implemented over time. And then in terms of the data and algorithms, a couple good practices are to be transparent. We know that data reflects inequities, gender inequities, and broader inequities. And it's important to be transparent about what's included and what's not included, so we can recognize the different implications for the AI tools. When collecting new data, considering partnering with local orgs and keeping demographic info and training data for kind of auditing purposes and to mitigate gender bias down the line. Thinking creatively around different features and variables and algorithms that can embed social inequities, and how to kind of avoid this and different types of features and variables that might be utilized otherwise. And then just when we're leveraging open source tools, really recognizing and being transparent about those limitations. And the last set of good practices are around ongoing management and stakeholder engagement. So integrating that local capacity building and training around AI tools. Again, really great points brought up by Kate and Christina around this. Engaging with policymakers and other stakeholders, and considering how algorithms can help identify where to intervene offline. Sometimes they can be really helpful tools in building different types of interventions to tackle gender inequities. And thinking about resource development, creating different resources specific to target audiences and making sure they're usable. Sometimes there can be a trade-off between being really holistic, but also being realistic and simple for kind of the different target audiences, and making sure they're available in different languages. And the last thing I want to mention is the role of different stakeholders, and particularly when it comes, obviously there's a role for a variety of different stakeholders, but really focusing on kind of multilateral organizations and donors. To the next slide, we need to think about kind of funding projects and research, including filling some of these funding gaps, helping create a set of shared definitions, and continuing communities of practice like this, where people can have frank discussions and learn from each other about these challenges and the very real tensions that exist in this space and good new practices, and continuing raising awareness and developing reports and public materials. So just to end with a reflection on the journey of the community of practice, Chris shared some of these great statistics, but we have over 500 members representing different disciplines and over 30 countries. It's been quite a journey. The last 6 months, looking at bias, to thinking about different ways to integrate gender equity into international development, humanitarian assistance with AI, thinking about transparency and accountability, AI governance, and gender representation in AI. So we've really covered a lot of ground, and I just want to thank the entire community for coming on this journey with us. And you can access the videos from the different sessions, as well as the newsletters in that QR code. So be sure to check that out. And with that, I'm really excited to, and just some final key considerations. Again, when we think about equitable AI, of course, gender is important, but we have to think about intersectionality and other demographics in this. And remember, this is an ongoing journey. There's still so much to learn in this space. And so kind of reflecting on that, recognizing, again, the limitations and knowing that we're on this journey together, and keeping that in mind. And thinking about how AI is assessed initially and over time. So tracking some of those impacts, and really kind of being reflective as a community. So just want to thank you for your participation, and really excited from here to bring up some new speakers who are from one of our other grantees. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Mary Akenyame, excuse me, who is the senior lecturer and the Department of Statistics at the University of Lagos. Chika Yinya-Banjo, who is the associate professor at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Lagos, and then Ola Ajayi, who is a computer scientist in the AI and robotics lab at the University of Lagos. So really excited to hear from the three of you about your project, and over to you.
Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think we're just going to start out by saying thank you to USAID and DAI for the opportunity to contribute a bit to the Equitable AI community. And thank you to the Atlantic Council for giving us an opportunity to share our work with the world. So when we started out with, our grant was titled Gender Equity in Healthcare in Northern Nigeria, and it was work done in collaboration with Navy. Navy is a tech company based out in Boston. We started out with a lot of questions, but then we narrowed down our questions into two broad questions, which was, do all gender have equal access to healthcare in Northern Nigeria? And also, can AI models be used to understand medical symptoms based on the text supplied via the respondents? So we set out to use some tools, which was to develop questionnaires to get fresh data from the field and see what's happening right there in Northern Nigeria in terms of access to healthcare. We developed a 5-point gender equity healthcare access framework, which involved processing our data, passing it through natural language processing, bringing out our annotations, developing a gender-based audit tool, passing the data through machine learning models, conducting data analysis, and building an audit platform, and also propagating our results. So our data was collected via Navy's chatbot, and it's a chatbot that is hosted on WhatsApp. The data was downloaded into Excel and passed in through Python and analyzed, and then we developed some NLP, NER models through the UX platform. In total, we collected 2,702 models and data points in English, and 1,903 data points in Hausa. Hausa is a Nigerian language, and it's a low resource language. Some people would argue that it's actually a no resource language, but we'll see about that. So what did we find? What did we find? One, we found that healthcare services are more accessible to the elderly and youth in Northern Nigeria. We found that women with lower income and education levels tend to visit the community healthcare center, and their fellow women who have high income and low education level would not go to the healthcare center, but have like probably some form of HMO that supplies that they use as their healthcare provider. We also find that people who are we also found that people who are self-employed do not have as much access to healthcare as people who are unemployed. We also found that even though, yes, AI can be used to understand medical symptoms, we found that the models were really not, the NLP and AR models were not quite able to identify words in the indigenous Hausa language, and we had to use human interpreters to interpret data from English to Hausa. We also found that when words were misspelled in our local language, we had to use human auditors to check for those kind of words, because the NLP and AR models struggled to interpret those misspelled words. We also found that symptoms could be subjective and context dependent, which would introduce complexities in extraction accuracy for the models. So, so we do think that going forward, it will be nice to see how we can develop models that adapt directly to our local peculiarities. So that, because one of the challenges we had was actually getting the right kind of language translator to translate the English language to the local language. So going forward, we're going to be looking at models that can directly interpret the data. Thank you very much.